Hi there, my name is Fadia and welcome to one of my all-time favorite places in the world, the kitchen. Whether it's big or small, whether you have a lot of tools or you don't, what really matters is what you're bringing to the table. When I first learned how to make food, the first thing my mom would ask me is, how do you feel today? I'm Palestinian. And in the Arabic world, we have this belief that really doesn't translate called nifs. It's essentially that soul spirit thing that you carry within you that you infuse into your food. And that's what makes something delicious into something super craveable, okay? So before you even touch ingredients, ask yourself, how am I feeling today? What kind of energy am I gonna impart? How will I be transforming this food? And ultimately, how are you gonna be transformed by it as well, okay? So if you're feeling great, let's get into this. Today we are going to make a gluten-free vegan galette. A galette is essentially a free-form hand pie, and you make it with kind of a stiffer dough so that you can actually form it without needing a pie tin or a pie pan or whatever you want to call it. Okay, and the reason why I love this pie recipe is it's pretty straightforward. It's really easy. I know you're looking at the recipe right now and telling me, Fatty, what about this is easy? There's like 3 things that we're making in one. The great news is if you don't have the time to do it all in one day, you can break it up and do the dough one day and then the pastry cream the second day and the filling and then put it all together and bake it, or you can prepare the whole thing and freeze it and bake it a different time. But anyway, let us get into it. All right, so today we are going to do a mix of an apple and peach pie, and when we get to the fruit, I'll talk a little bit about mixing fruits and pairing them up and what you should be looking for and what you should be doing. So before we even get started, I'm not going to tell you to preheat your oven. That'll come later. I'm already preheating mine and I'll explain why. All right, so first thing is, if you look at your recipe, I wrote step 1, you're going to mix in your wet ingredients. This is 1/4 cup of sweet pea protein. It's called Ripple. The reason why I really like this particular brand instead of soy milk is that this doesn't have soy, it's not a nut milk, so people are less likely to be allergic to this, and so that's why I like to use it, and it also is a great product and works really well in baking for vegan food. So we got our vegan milk right here, 1/4 cup. We are going to add 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, and you'll see almost immediately that it's starting to get like curdled. That's great. We actually want to create this reaction, which is going to make a fluffier pie crust. And we're just going to add 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract. Be very careful with almond extract. It's a very strong flavor. We're going to mix, and you can tell it's already kind of curdled. Curdled kind of means that it's a little chunky. Not the best descriptor for a food that you want to eat, but scientifically it's going to do wonders for our pastry crust. Okay? I have in here 1 1/4 cups of my favorite gluten-free flour recipe. It's actually my own recipe, so I didn't share it in the recipe, but I'll share it here. It is 2 cups of white rice flour, 1 cup of potato starch, 1 cup of tapioca flour, and 1 teaspoon of xanthan gum. And it'll produce 4 cups of gluten-free flour. You don't have to make your own. You can absolutely just buy the 1-to-1 Bob's Mills or whatever your favorite gluten-free flour is. So 1 1/4 cups. And here I have 2 tablespoons of sugar, and I have my 1/4 teaspoon of salt. They're gonna go right on there. And over here I have my leavening agents. I have 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder and 1/8 teaspoon of baking soda. All these things are going to react, especially the baking soda, it's going to react to the apple cider vinegar that we put into our milk. We are just going to whisk them to combine. And now we're going to grab our 5 tablespoons of cold vegetable shortening. And this is the specific brand that I really like. The reason why I like this vegan product is because it doesn't have a weird aftertaste, like it doesn't taste like plant product. It is Rainforest Alliance certified, it is fair trade, and it also has like a very pure white color. So I use this in almost all my vegan baking. So I highly, highly recommend it. You don't have to use this product, use whatever your favorite one is. But if you're asking me, this is the one I'm always gonna advise you to buy. Okay, we are going to go ahead and put in our 5 tablespoons of shortening, and we're just going to coat it by hand initially. If you're doing this in a food processor, this won't take you more than a minute. This is a pastry cutter, okay? This is what's used for pies, for, I'm trying to think what other crusts we use this for, but mostly pies for sure. Biscuits, I use this for biscuits as well. So the movement is punch and twist, okay? So I'll do it slowly so you can see. And if you don't have a pastry cutter, I've seen people do it with 2 knives. You just kind of cut apart like this. But this will take you a long time. And you can also do the same movement with forks. If you have a food processor, definitely use a food processor. Don't be shy. And you don't want it to be super fine and super smooth. You actually want some variation in the fat. We call that marbling, and I'll show it to you once the crust is completed. All right, and this looks good to me. We're going to add our milk mixture. And using a rubber spatula, we're gonna bring it all together. And we'll see large clumps are gonna start to form. See that? And that's great. That's what we want. Once we start getting to this point, we're gonna start pressing it together to create a unified dough. The best way to do this, honestly, is to just turn it over onto your work surface. Make sure you got all of it. And you're just gonna kind of squeeze it all together. It will take a little work. And if the temperature is really dry outside, you might need to add a little bit more milk. And I can tell that my dough is really dry because it keeps flaking apart. So I'm actually just gonna add a touch more milk. And when I mean a touch, I mean like half a teaspoon. And you put it in the dry areas, the dry pockets. And the goal is to just kind of bring this together. You can add more liquid in the bowl, which honestly is what I would recommend. But you can see that that was a sufficient amount of liquid to bring this together. If your dough is a little sticky, don't worry about it. I'd rather always have a stickier dough than a drier dough, because when we work with it, when we roll it out, we're gonna be adding more flour to it. So if it has extra moisture, that added flour is gonna absorb it. I'm pretty happy with this dough. The good thing is, because we're making a gluten-free flour dough, gluten-free recipe, it doesn't really matter how much you work this dough. So unlike a traditional pastry crust, you don't want to touch it any more than that because it gets really tough because you're building the gluten. But in this case, there's no gluten to worry about. So if we touch it a little more, that's actually okay. At this stage, we're just gonna wrap it up in plastic wrap and put it in the fridge for at least 30 minutes, preferably an hour, to overnight, okay? So if we were planning on, this would be the time, once this goes into the fridge, now I'll tell you to preheat your oven. So for step number 2, we're gonna start working on preparing our cream. The cream is essentially gonna be the layer between the crust and the fruit. So the fruit, it'll be in between there. Okay, I said that. We have, this is 3 tablespoons of sugar, of powdered sugar, that we are going to sift into a bowl. And the reason why we sift it is because we don't want these clumps in there. So I'm gonna push those through with your fingers. You could use a spoon. Here I have 2.5 tablespoons of the same vegan milk. That's gonna go in there. Finally, we're gonna put in 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract in this as well. And now that gets whisked together. If you're using a mixer, you can totally use a mixer to do this. And by the way, if you don't have vanilla almond extract, you don't need to use it. You can use vanilla, or you can just omit it altogether. And what we're looking for here is to make like a really foamy texture. You'll do this for about a minute. That looks pretty good to me. So I'm gonna call it right there. We are going to also add in 2 teaspoons of melted shortening, vegan shortening. I like to whisk that in as well. And then finally, we're going to put in 3 tablespoons of finely ground almonds. So it's almond meal. If you're allergic to almonds or don't want to use nuts, you can use more of your gluten-free flour. I would recommend definitely using an extract if you're gonna do that. You could do that, you could do rolled oats, finely ground. It just needs to be something that is finely ground and really absorbent so that it can create this kind of thickened cream texture, okay? If you dislike this color, you can actually add a tiny bit, like 1/8 of a teaspoon of turmeric, and it'll give it like more of a yellow golden hue. I don't think it really matters too much because it's going to be underneath the fruit. But if it's visible and you don't like this beigeish color, You can absolutely add something like turmeric to it, and I will show you what that looks like. I prepared a batch in advance so that I can show you side by side what that looks like. So once your cream is done, you're just going to put this in the fridge to rest as well, and it'll be ready for us when we assemble our pie all together. Okay, so this goes into the fridge with the pie crust. Our next step is to prepare the fruit. So for fruit, I got 2 apples, and I also grabbed a peach. Now, typically you would not be mixing fruits in a galette. Usually you would just do one or the other, and you want them all to be roughly the same ripeness so that when you're baking it, they get tender at around the same time. Okay, that's kind of the risk that you're assuming when you're adding different fruits. Peaches obviously have more water in them, so I'm going to use less of a peach, even though its firmness is roughly that of an apple. We all know that peaches will release water a lot faster. So first things first, we have to prep our fruit. I'm going to take this and I'm going to slice it right down the middle. Then I'm going to peel it, because it's much easier to peel an apple when it has a flat surface and a sharp edge than it is when it's just like a big sphere. We cut our apple in half and then we peeled it, and now we're going to quarter it. So we're going to cut it again. Okay, you can see here, this is the corner we want to get it out. Leave it flat against the table, and you're going to cut at a diagonal like this. Okay, so like here's your fruit, and you're going to cut at it like that. Okay, you lay your hand flat on top, or you can pinch it with your fingers, and that's it. There's my apple. There you go. As you can see, we're mixing fruits here. So my general rule of thumb, rarely would I ever put more than 3 different fruits together, because what happens is they become really disharmonious and they start to muddle each other. So it's almost like they're all fighting for attention, and none of them are actually getting the proper attention that they need or deserve. So for the peach, you're going to take your knife, let's move these apples out of the way, and you're going to run it down the center and rotate the actual fruit. Okay. Typically you can twist it and pull, and hopefully that should be able to separate but as you can see, when it's ripe, it does that easily. When it's not ripe, like this one, it doesn't do it so easily. So instead of doing that, we're gonna actually cut it like we would a mango. I can tell that the pit is gonna be longer here and here, just from the shape of the fruit, and it's gonna be shorter here and here, again, from the shape of the fruit. In this case, I'm actually gonna tell you, you should probably peel it before you cut it. It will be easier. So again, it's gonna be longer, the pit is gonna be longer here and here, and shorter here and here. So I'm gonna cut straight up and down like that. Okay, same thing on the other side. This is, by the way, how you would cut into a mango. I'm gonna cut there, and once it hits the pit, I'm gonna stop. And then I'm going to kind of cut around what I imagine is the pit. And this is great. This has already been cut into slices. We're gonna cut this guy into slices. Now for the apples, same thing. You want them to be about 1/4 of an inch. I actually think as long as they're kind of uniform, it doesn't really matter. We're gonna put our sliced fruit into a bowl. So our sliced fruit is in a bowl. I have 2 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice, and there's a 1/2 teaspoon of lemon zest in here. When we talk about a teaspoon, I mean packed. Like, you really want it packed in there. So we have our zest and lemon juice in here. I have a 1/4 cup of granulated sugar, so regular sugar, and a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. I'm just gonna whisk these to combine, and then this is gonna go right on top, and we're gonna mix it all together. The process that we're doing right now, remember when I talked about how peaches are a little more fleshy than apples and they have more water? What we're doing right now, this is called maceration. Maceration is essentially when you put a crystallized sugar or salt, because it can be done with salt, onto a fruit, and it starts to absorb, like pull out the water from it through the process of osmosis. And what that does is it helps reduce the amount of water that's in the fruit, so when we put it in the pastry crust, it helps us avoid it becoming soggy. It may still happen, and that's okay. But the great part of this is when you do this, you end up with this really amazing syrupy bottom. This is gold. This is the part that most people don't realize has the absolute most flavor. Now that this is done, this is gonna go into the fridge and it's gonna wait for once we roll out our pastry. The longer it waits, the more of that juice you're gonna get and the drier the fruit is gonna be, okay? Let's get that in the fridge. Let's grab our pastry dough and then let's start rolling this out. All right. Okay. So here's the dough that we made. It hasn't quite rested for 30 minutes. No, it's probably rested for about 30 minutes, not an hour. It's still pretty soft and it'll be easy to work with. If you are gonna use parchment paper, if you have parchment paper, just lay your parchment paper down onto your work surface and you wanna try and tape the edges, but sometimes it won't even stick, but that's okay. If you don't have parchment paper, we're gonna do it directly onto our tabletop. And what is going to be really important is that you add a very, very healthy dusting of flour because pie crusts are notorious for getting stuck onto your work surface, okay? You wanna do a generous amount on top, generous amount on bottom. And you wanna move it around to make sure that it doesn't stick. The reason why it's much easier to do this on parchment paper is that if it sticks, it's sticking to the parchment paper and you can just pick it up and move it to a baking sheet. If you have one of these rolling pins, these are awesome. They have these wheels on the end that you can interchange and they allow you to measure out how thick your dough is gonna be. If you do not and you have just like a traditional rolling pin, either way, it's going to be very important that you do this. Coat it with a lot of flour. You wanna be able to feel the grainy texture against it and you're going to roll it out. I like to go from one corner to the other. And you'll notice because it's like a gluten-free pie crust, it's gonna crack a lot because it doesn't have the gluten to hold it together. So you just need to be a little bit more delicate with it. And we're gonna roll it out to a 12-inch disc. All right, that's about 12 inches. So I'm good with this. All right, now the key is going to be how do we transfer this from here onto our baking sheet. Well, I got my baking sheet here, all right? You definitely need to put something on this. You cannot bake this pie crust directly onto the baking sheet, otherwise it will stick. If you have silk pats, you can use a silk pat. Traditionally, you would just roll this onto this, but I'm afraid that it's going to fall apart. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use a cake lifter that allows you to slide it under and lift it up. Okay. All right. Now you can see I struggled a little bit with that, and that's okay. Since the galette is meant to be kind of a rustic shape, it's really not a big deal. And what we're gonna do now is we're going to trim the edges anyway. And we're gonna save the dough because we're gonna use it for a different project in this video series, okay? We're gonna grab, if you have a pizza cutter or a pasta cutter, you're just gonna go around the edges. And we're gonna just clean all these edges up. It doesn't even have to be a perfect circle. Okay. This stuff can all come off of it. And now we have a somewhat circular pie crust, okay? We're gonna grab our creams, our pastry creams, and then we're gonna add them into our pie. Remember I told you you could add turmeric to make it a little more golden? So this is kind of the color comparison. This is the one we just made and this is one I made earlier. We're gonna go ahead and use this one, the one we made together, and spread it all over this crust. We're gonna use all of it. If you have an offset spatula, this is a great time to use it. Try and take it as far to the edge as I possibly can. This filling is so delicious. And now we're gonna look at our fruit. So I also wanna show you, this is fruit that I prepared the night before. This was prepared yesterday and you can see all the juices like came out of it, okay? And these are the fruits that we just prepared. You can see there's also juices coming out of these. We're gonna go ahead and use the ones that we just prepared. You can start from the edges and work your way in, so that's what I'm gonna do. And I'm leaving enough space to the edge so that I can like fold it over and crimp it around the apples. Okay, so you wanna leave about like an inch. It's not gonna be perfect, it's gonna be beautiful, it's gonna be delicious. So I got my first row of apples. I'm gonna do a row of peaches now. Oh, they're so pretty. Yeah, so we actually did not need all that fruit. You probably could just do it with 2 pieces of fruit. Now we get to the final stage, which is the crimping, bringing it all together. So make sure your hands are dry. What I like to do is I like to just kind of bring it over and pinch it. This is a very tender dough. The worst thing that's gonna happen is that it'll leak into our pan, but that's why we have it in a baking sheet. And if you find that the fruit are kind of poking out of the dough, you can push them in. We're just kind of like folding it up and making sure that it's closing around here, around the curve. If we want to add like a style to it, like a traditional crimp, pinch and push. And it kind of creates this like little triangle. If you're finding that the dough is difficult to work with, this would be a good time to just kind of like put it back in the fridge and let it firm up. But like I said, this is actually intended to be a very rustic looking pie. It's not supposed to be perfect. There we go. I'm gonna actually, since the dough is so soft, I'm gonna put it back in the fridge for like a good 10-15 minutes. Then I'm gonna put it straight in the oven. Or you know what? I'll put it in the freezer. I'm gonna put it in the freezer for 15 minutes and then it'll firm up and then we'll bake it straight away. Okay? All right. While I'm cleaning up here, I have the scraps from our pie crust. This is what I cut off. I actually want you to save this, okay? So put it back in some plastic wrap, fold it up. We're gonna put it in the fridge and just leave it there. Actually, put it in your freezer and I will tell you when I take it out next. All right? Okay, so it's been 15 minutes. My pie crust is thoroughly chilled. It's definitely a bit firmer. I'm gonna throw it in my oven, I'm gonna put it in my oven gently for about 20 to 25 minutes at 400 degrees, and we'll go from there. Okay. Now, while we're waiting for that to bake, I have this issue of this extra fruit, okay? I'd hardly call it an issue, but let's say you don't want any wasted effort and you don't really know what to do with this fruit now. I would actually strain the fruit and get this juice and use it as a drizzle on top of my, my pie when it's done. I'm gonna go ahead and strain these guys. Make sure that we get all of it because this is all very yummy stuff. So this is one thing you can do. The other thing that you can do, and I'm gonna try it because why not? We can process these apples in a food processor and make kind of like an applesauce, but we're not gonna cook it. We're gonna leave it fresh because there's something really nice about the taste of fresh fruit with baked fruit, because when they bake, they taste so much different because they caramelize, it brings out different notes. Whereas when it's fresh, I always feel like the best way to describe it is that it's green. We're gonna go ahead and put this in the food processor. And we're gonna keep that reserved juice. And I have it in the bowl of my processor. This is my food processor. It's a really small guy. And you can see it's still like kind of chunky, so I'm gonna add some of this juice into it. Does not look like my food processor is really processing well. I am going to turn around and use my very strong blender instead, my Vitamix back there. And with that, we've created a really beautiful, very fragrant puree. And this is now going to be the drizzle that we put on top of our pie when it's completed. Okay, so 20 minutes have passed. Our galette has been in the oven. We're gonna pull it out and check on it right now. So you can see it's just starting to brown right there. So I think another 5 minutes will be great. And then we're gonna turn on the broiler so that we can caramelize a little bit of the fruit. But I wanna talk to you guys about topping. In the recipe, I talk about demerara sugar. Demerara sugar is basically a large grain raw sugar. And the reason why, if you want to add this, you absolutely do not need to. It's not for sweetness, it's really more for texture because this sugar won't melt and it creates like a crunchy texture on top of the pie. So I'm just gonna go ahead and sprinkle a little bit on top. And if you've ever had like muffins with a crusty sugar top on top, this is typically what it is. It's some form of cane sugar. And if you want, you can actually put it on the pie before it goes in the oven. You can put it before the broiler, but probably not after because it won't really do anything. I think that looks great. Okay, so I'm gonna put this back in the oven for another 5 minutes, and then we're gonna turn on the broiler and we'll let it get nice and crispy from the top. Okay, so I added an additional 10 minutes onto the bake time, so it's been in my oven for about 30 minutes now. So we're gonna pull it out and check on it. And it really depends on your oven, how hot it gets. That will determine how long you bake it for. I would say start checking at 20 minutes and then check every 5 minutes after that. And what we're looking for is exactly this really light golden color. And if you have a thin spatula, I would say slide it underneath and just check to see that it's browning ever so lightly, and this one is. So now it's perfectly ready to be put under the broiler. So I'm gonna put my oven rack all the way up top, and I'm gonna turn the broiler on high. And then I'm gonna put it back in for like a minute or two, okay? All right, let's check on our pie and see how it's doing. Ooh. I can see little bits of the fruit are getting caramelized, so I actually think I'm gonna lower it to the middle rung instead of keeping it on the high rung, but it's starting to give me some of that color. All right. This pie is looking picture perfect. And you can check the bottom of the crust. It looks really good. Obviously, I would let it cool. You could serve it with whipped cream. You could serve it with ice cream. And we have this beautiful drizzle that we created from the leftover fruit, which I would just then kind of drizzle on top. And then I would cut this piece and serve it. And it would be an added flavor. Otherwise, as is perfect. If you want, you can sprinkle a little powdered sugar on top, especially if you don't use the demerara sugar. And there you have it. Bon appetit. I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, and I hope you tune in next time because we are going to continue this journey of delicious vegan foods, and I can't wait. All right, have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Bye.